something also? I see you're unmuted. No, okay. Welcome back to Senate Education. It's Tuesday, May 4th, 3:18 p.m. Committee, we're still on 106, and I think we have to decide a couple of things. First is, let's go back to Senator Pearson's request. This is a conversation that was had with appropriations around the time that the big bill was being passed, and whether or not, or what he heard from the chair of Appropes is that she and others would prefer that the language to create an incentive for districts to buy locally be directed to this bill and get tied in with the language to get to universal school meals and tie that into community schools. And so I'm wondering if senators are comfortable with putting that language into the bill. And I just would also want to bring us back. You may recall on the floor, I mentioned we had heard from Senator Starr, or I had heard from Senator Starr, that it was going to make it in. It did not. I think in some ways it gave our committee greater enthusiasm for the bill, or gave me even more enthusiasm for the bill, S100, when it passed. And yeah, I just think it's a real game changer. I think it enhances what the nutritional value likely that of the meals themselves if food comes locally, and it does help. It is an economic development tool. So that's where I'm at, and wondering if anybody is opposed to adding that in. Okay, Mr. Timmeray, I think we will then indeed add that in. Thank you. The second topic that's come up is, senators may recall, Dr. Boucher from the agency last week was in. And Jim, I'll look to Mr. Desmarais to help me frame this if need be, but really we were talking about how do we focus in on those schools that might qualify to receive funding. So we were talking about, again, was in. And Jim, I'll look to Mr. Desmarais to help me frame this if need be, but really, is anybody hearing that echo, or was it just me?
That was me, Senator Campion, joining your meeting. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So framing this, Dr. Boucher thought, if we tighten those schools or those districts that are qualified, I don't remember the reasoning behind it, but basically I think, okay, instead of getting, we'd be focusing in a way on those schools that would need community schools the most. And she's put forward a couple of proposals that would get us at that. Jim has already mentioned them to us, and I'm wondering if Mr. Desmarais would just bring us through that a second time.
Happy to. So we are on page 8 in the bill, and we're looking at the definition of an eligible school. It's on line 14. So there are two parts of this definition. And the first part is around eligibility for free or reduced price lunch. So originally, the bill said that if 40% of the students in the district were eligible or in the school for a free or reduced, the school would qualify. Okay. Now, Dr. Boucher came back and said, well, if you change that 40% to 55%, so you had to have 55% of the students eligible, that would yield 45 schools that would be eligible. If alternatively you made the cutoff for this the top quartile of schools with the highest percentage of students on free or reduced, that would yield 73 schools. So you have 45 schools versus 73 schools on that first criteria. Okay. Second criteria is whether the school is eligible for comprehensive or equity support. Schools that are eligible for comprehensive support, not equity, but just comprehensive, would add 15 to 20 schools. And if you made it equity support, that would be an additional 150 schools or more. So as she expresses it, it's really what she's looking at is it's determined by how many schools do you want to be eligible for these grants. So we can play with the language to meet the numbers that you want to achieve, basically.
And as I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, committee, this was us working to help the AOE so that they could have a more targeted look, if you will, rather than, because remember, we've switched this around. It's not, we're asking them to go out basically and identify schools that are going to need this the most. And this is sort of tightening it up in terms of who they might look to. And so Senator Hooker.
Sorry, Senator Campion, but I need a definition of comprehensive supports as opposed to equity support.
I wish I could give you that. I don't actually know that answer. I always came from AOE. I'm not sure exactly how they define that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Senator Hooker, go ahead. We'll get that for you. I'll ask Mr. Desmarais to reach out to Heather, to Dr. Boucher to get those definitions. Senator Persley.
Well, I think it's defined in section 1111C4D of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. That's how I read that. So if you were to, go find that, it probably would talk about that. But well, I don't understand what their suggestion is.
I'll tell you, unbelievable. Right off the top of his head.
Maybe you could give that to me in 25 words or less.
I've got the Education Act of 1965 filed away here. Before I was even born, I had that memorized. Okay, what is it that they're changing? That or and? Did it used to say something else, and they're wanting us to decide on whether it should be or?
Yeah. So they're saying it depends. The language can change based upon how many schools you want to be eligible for these grants. So, so she's giving options in terms of how you can limit the numbers. You can limit by changing the definition of poverty, or changing your use of comprehensive versus equity, or both.
And if we said and, it would narrow it much more greater than if we said or, obviously.
Yeah, if
and
you
then,
said, yeah.
And then, do I remember correctly, with the dollar amount, we're thinking at that $110,000 per grant, it would be about 20 grants?
Well, going back to the earlier discussion today, the bill now would not have dollar amounts per applicant or per recipient. That would be left to the discretion of the AOE.
Okay. But at 110, it was going to be about 20, I guess.
Yeah.
There's $3 million, is that right?
Yeah, 3.4 million. Yeah.
20
Okay, so more like 30.
Okay. 30, yeah.
Okay.
Senator Hooker?
Oh, I was just going to say the 110, isn't the 110 or up to 110 still in there?
Not based on our discussion about an hour ago.
Okay.
When we talked about having more flexibility around how this all works,
Okay.
the idea was to give flexibility but not put limits on the amount.
Yeah, because it occurred to me that if you have a consultant or someone who's overseeing one school, as opposed to overseeing 2 or 3 schools, there might be a difference in compensation for that. But, so I see where it could happen without any, yeah. Okay.
So it's, I guess where I'm struggling a little bit after thinking about some of these things is, the agency could do this on their own, right? I mean, the agency could say, we're going to focus, we're going to narrow down our pool by looking at A, B, and C, and it still would meet the needs of community schools. Is that accurate?
Well, I think with the agency came in, Dr. Roche wanted to have more definition around the pool. Because the agencies use discretion within that pool, and they want to know how big that pool is.
What do people think?
I'm okay either way. I'm okay either way. If they feel like they want to have this reduced scope to make it easier on them for the schools that are most in need, I'm okay with it. But I'm also okay with the way we had it, where they could just decide to narrow it on their own. I guess they're just trying to make their decision easier. So if we decide for them.
And I think for
Well, yeah,
me,
but-
go ahead, Senator Lyons.
I was just going to say, if we decide for them and then they just find out that we shouldn't have. Yeah, so I just think flexibility is a good thing.
Yeah, I think also, is there somebody that wouldn't make it in with this criteria? I mean, is there a school out there or district that really needs these services? And probably not, maybe not, but I'm just worried that, could somebody get closed out? Jim?
Well, what Dr. Roche is giving the committee is options, not a recommendation. And I'm wondering if you want to go back to her and ask for a recommendation from AOE as to what the pool should be, because they might be more in a position to make a recommendation than for you to determine what that is. So she said, she's come back to us and said, if you do this, it results in this many schools, you do that. But she hasn't come back and said, we recommend that you do X in terms of this criteria.
She sent me an email, and I unfortunately, I can't find my iPad at this moment, but Jim, I think you were copied on that email. Was there greater specificity in that?
No, it's just giving you numbers of schools if you go with different options. So it's not a recommendation as to what to do. It's just giving you options.
Yeah. Senator Perslick.
Jim, is there anything in here that would preclude them from doing an application as part of it? I know we didn't want to just do applications because of the kind of the bias and equity concerns of doing that, but they could do to help them. They could reach out to schools and then try to get them to apply as a way of helping them identify the schools that want to do this work. And then there'll be groups that'll be out there, working with the schools, I assume.
Right, yeah, nothing precludes them from the process. They can do grants or solicit information or however they want.
Yeah, I agree with Senator Lyons that more flexibility to those people that are in the field and are the experts seem better than us trying to randomly pick whether it's going to be 40 schools or 60 schools that are eligible.
So in other words, not requiring this, just again, kind of giving them that flexibility.
That's what I would say. I mean, I know they didn't, what I took her, she didn't want to have the flexibility, but I
Yeah.
If they want it.
Right. Senator Hooker, what do you think?
Well, I'm wondering. I mean, originally I thought that this was sort of a first stab at community schools, or I hesitate to call it a pilot program, but
Right.
you know, so to limit it, or and we've talked about wanting to make sure that those schools that are in the most need are getting the money to do this. So I guess I'm kind of torn between putting parameters around it and leaving it open, because it goes back to our initial concern that those schools that can do these things and apply, going back to the kind of the application process would, but schools that didn't have those resources and that person power wouldn't. So I'm just wondering, how do we get to those schools and yet not close out other schools that may be kind of just over the line? I don't know. So
So
I guess-
is the application process and the granting process first come, first serve, or is it more sort of, it's
No,
egalitarian?
we switched that around. So we're asking AOE to go out and to identify the schools.
So then, that being the case, it seems that flexibility is a good thing. If you were worried about making sure you're going to cover a lot of schools, you'd put a first come, first serve. You'd have some specified amount and process, but
Senator Hooker?
or if AOE is going to do this, then they're just going to those schools that they think are the ones that are most qualified, or the
There
ones
you
in
or
most
not.
need, or not.
Yeah, to help them. I think, yeah.
So I'm inclined, again, so to keep this broad, allow them to do their work that they believe is needed. So I think we remove this for now, Mr. Desmarais, and then I'll also touch base with Dr. Boucher again. And if so, I'll bring back a more compelling argument.
Okay, so we go back to the last draft. Last draft was schools with 40% or more, reduced price lunch,
Yep.
or comprehensive supports or equity supports. So it's very broad. So I'll go back to that language as we had before.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we have now a new draft that we're working from. We know that we've gone back to that original language, and we are adding Senator Pearson's language. And I think we are all in agreement with the language that we heard last Friday on equity, that is now making its way through the findings and other things, as well as what we heard from the two gentlemen that were here earlier, a couple of language changes to allow greater flexibility in grants. So now we have a solid draft. We know that it is going to be edited, and we'll look at it together tomorrow. But before we do that, we do have a request from Mr. Nichols, who is on the line. Jay, thanks for joining us. I believe you are representing more than just yourself. If you wouldn't mind, we also have the Department of Health in the waiting room, if you will. So we'd just like to hear your concern, and then committee can have a discussion if time permits, but we can always return to it tomorrow. So with that, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. For the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director, Vermont Principals Association. I'm just trying to move my window here so I can see my notes. This is not pretty testimony, because I thought I was doing it tomorrow, but I will send you something in writing after I fix it up tonight. So this is on H106, and I'm referring to version 3.1 of the Community Schools Bill. So good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of our organizations. We worked closely with Representative James in the House Committee on Education earlier this legislative session, and we provided testimony there near the end of February. And our testimony today is limited to the community schools provisions in the legislation, not the task force on universal school lunch in Section 5 of the bill. Consistent with our testimony on February 24th, we want to indicate support for the underlying purpose of the bill, which is to establish a grant program to support the improvement of services to all children.
Mr. Nichols, I'm just going to stop you. We totally get that you guys love it. Just if you could get to the punchline, that would be a huge help.
Here I go.
Thank you.
Okay. So our only substantive recommendation has to do with Section 3.5, inclusion of a legislatively derived site-based leadership team within the bill. We think this language and any other instance of inclusion of this language within the bill should be removed from the bill. The reasons are as follows. We are against legislation of any school team for such a specific purpose. Schools and school systems already have leadership teams. School districts are governed by school boards, overseen by superintendents, with schools being managed and led day-to-day by principals. The systems and teams they already have in place should be utilized to the degree possible. Creating another team reflects redundancy in many areas. If school boards working with superintendents, principals, and others want to create a site-based leadership team strictly for community school purposes, that's fine with us. However, this should not be mandated through legislation. The more flexibility you can give school districts to make the concepts of community schools implementable for them, the better. Mandating such a team with spelled out team member composition will cause many systems to not apply for what is a pretty small amount of financial support given what schools are dealing with post-pandemic and the funds that they're working through right now. Lastly, in many systems, the work of community schools will be additive to work already ongoing in the school district, allowing schools to implement community schools work in the manner that makes the most sense at the local level, provide the best support for students and families. That really is the crux of it.
And we have that, or you're going to email that to us?
I will email that to you. Yes, I got to clean it up a little bit. I haven't spell checked it yet.
Okay. Mr. Desmarais?
Just to remind the committee that that language, the site-based leadership language, was added at the request of Colin Robertson at the Vermont NEA.
Okay.
And it was in the original bill and was taken out by House Ed.
Yep. All right, if you would email that to us, we're going to be taking this bill up again tomorrow, so we can have a conversation then, but it would be helpful for us all to look at your notes this evening. And if we need to hear again from somebody, we'll be back in touch.
Sounds good. And I will clean it up and get it out to you folks in the next little while.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you for having me in. Take care.
Mr. Englander, appreciate your patience very much. As you probably know, we are now shifting back to H426. This is addressing, as you know, public school facilities, and we have an amendment from Senator Pearson that would require all schools to test for radon. And Senator Lyons brought up some good questions around, okay, if we were to move in this direction, what does that trigger from the Department of Health? We also want to confirm that the Department of Health makes these radon kits and testing available to school districts and schools for free. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about the adding of requiring PCV testing. So I don't want to speak for the committee, but I think we had a lively conversation around making certain that families, students, staff, faculty, and others have as much information about the building, the health of the building, or the lack of the health of the building that they might be working and learning in. So with that, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon. My name is David Englander. I'm the Senior Policy and Legal Advisor to the Commissioner of Health. I have nothing prepared. I was in testimony on a different bill when I got this invitation. I was in a meeting between then and now. So maybe you could if I'm on the floor, maybe you could set some plates on the floor. So let me see if I can answer your question. So right now, so the department does offer radon testing at no cost. We have the capacity to do between 10 and 15 schools a year. No testing has taken place over this past year because we've been fully deployed to the pandemic. And we don't know when we're going to be back at full capacity. We're talking about transition, but the transition obviously is going to be slow. I think I discussed last time I was here that radon testing done privately can vary wildly in its costs from approximately $100 to up to about $3,500 to $5,000, depending on how many places are to be tested. In contrast to lead testing in schools, or I should say water testing for lead in schools, it's a more technically complex regime. Testing is not like just going to the water and turning it on. You actually have to know where to place the sensors and for how long, and make sure that that certain actions should take in place with regard to the HVAC system. You can only do it when the school is up and running. And remediation costs can be free to the extent that you can open windows and change the HVAC regime to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the nature of the problem. With regard to PCBs, it's much more complicated. It's much more expensive to test for indoor air. I assume the committee is aware that there is $5 million in the budget for DEC to work with VDH to work on a testing regime for schools. But my understanding is that is simply, and Mr. Chair, you would know more about this than I do, given the state of play. My understanding, which may be old at this point, is that there's monies available, but there isn't a requirement for schools to participate or test. So I'm sorry. So Senator Pierce, so you forgive me. I have not looked at Senator Pearson's amendment. It would require testing for both radon and PCBs.
No, it would just right now require the testing for radon in all of our schools. I don't recall, we have Ledge Council here. I don't remember what the deadline for that is in his amendment. Jim, do you happen to know? And then we were thinking about adding to that requiring for PCB testing, knowing that the $5 million is there to address the testing of PCBs. Mr. Demery, we're talking about Pearson's amendment and whether or not there's a deadline. As Mr. Englander mentions, they haven't been testing because of the pandemic, of course, and there's going to be a transition back, to the agency, I think, to a level of normalcy, et cetera. When does Senator Pearson's amendment go into effect?
I didn't draft that. It's Becky's work.
I apologize.
I have to go find it to answer.
If you wouldn't mind, if you're able to, that'd be great. If not, we can always get it. But I think we're flexible around the date. Senator Lyons.
I'm remembering that there was, I believe that there was some language passed 4 or 5 years ago on radon testing in schools. And so I don't know I can't remember what it was. I remember working with the Lung Association when it was in this committee. I wasn't on the committee, so I just don't remember. And I don't know whether, David, you have a memory of that, or if anything actually went forward on numbers of schools per year or anything.
I don't
I don't either.
I don't recall, but anything before January of last year was 10,000 years ago.
Exactly. But as you were talking, you reminded me. So that's a good thing.
We can all help each other
Yes.
reconstitute our memories, which were once excellent.
Senator Hooker.
I'm looking at Senator Pearson's amendment, and there doesn't seem to be a date, but it seems as if he linked it to the inventory that was going to take place.
Yeah, which is on passage.
Right. That's on passage, but as far as a deadline for it, so what's the deadline for that inventory?
Senator Perchlik.
Deadline is January. of next year. So that if for the inventory is January, and then for the assessment the following October. Those are both in section 3 where his amendment adds radon.
And the agency references the Agency of Education.
Yeah, but it tells the Agency of Education shall coordinate with the Department of Health to perform a radon measurement. So the way I read it, there's coordination, but it isn't really clear if the Department of Health or Education is actually going to perform a radon measurement.
Normally when this is done, it's, is it the Department of Health deploys someone, Mr. Englander, to do these? If a school calls and says, we want to take advantage of these 10 to 15 annual tests given out each year?
Yes, we have an industrial hygienist who goes out and does it herself.
Mhm. And if we were to pass this amendment, and I should say that I think, again, I don't want to speak for everyone, but there is a clear feeling amongst committee members, I felt a few hours ago, that this is a very important step to take, which would mean, I don't know how many schools are left to be tested, but
350 or so.
okay. Does the agency have that capacity to finish that testing by January 2022?
No, I'm speaking for the Department of Health.
I'm sorry, the Department of Health, that would be responsible for this.
Yes, if we were responsible, that is not something that's possible.
Okay. When would the Department of Health be able to test our schools?
I honestly, I would have to go back to our folks. I can tell you that the industrial hygienist is fully deployed to COVID.
Understand?
So if the committee was thinking about a 10-year time frame, we're talking.
I don't think that. Oh, I'm sorry. 10-year time frame by. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm saying if we only have one person to do the work, it's going to take many years to get it done. If there would, in other words, our industrial hygienist can't do
Yeah.
can't do 100 in a year. Never mind 350 in a year.
Yeah. Senator Persley.
Yeah, Mr. Englander, one of the testimony, some of the discussions in the testimony, we were talking about this earlier, is how, homeowners do radon tests and you can order them and they can be pretty simple. Is it the Department of Health position that it should be done by like a Department of Health professional, or would there be a way of like having the contractor that's going to go do the building assessments, set out the radon tests and pick them up or something? Do you understand the question?
I do. I want to be cautious about saying it's the department's position, given that I haven't done any preparation or talked with anybody in order to discuss this with you. But with that said, the department wouldn't have, if it was purely from a resource perspective of the Department of Health, I don't think we wouldn't have a problem with the committee saying schools, you have to get this testing done. It can be done at a testing, at a private testing lab. There are many labs and consultants available to do this. I want to be very clear. That's a very narrowly focused only on our resources, not the cost of schools or school districts, et cetera.
So you're saying if schools again want to take this on their own, not use your funding, et cetera, you guys of course have no problem with it. 10 years, I just don't see. I mean, thousands of children, graduate, be out of school, teachers, all sorts of issues. Senator Lyons.
So I was just wondering if, just left my head. I'll come back to it because I just fell out of my brain.
Are you sure? We're just talking about the number of schools out there that would have to be tested in the timeline.
Oh, I know. Thank you. So two things. One, a linkage of radon with COVID. And is there a practical way to do that to access federal dollars as HVAC systems are being repaired, replaced, and so on? But is there a way to link maybe might be some creative thinking, but obviously wondering how we could access infrastructure dollars, not only to do this, but to help schools pay for the testing, which if it were at a private lab would cost more. That's a question for
Mr. Englander.
Mr. Englander.
Oh, Mr. Englander I would say that's a great question for I think JFO would be a great resource.
Well, no, I'm okay. So you're, I guess the first part of the question though is linking radon with COVID. That's kind of a health department. Could it be a health department?
You mean, is there a link between exposure to radon and susceptibility to COVID?
Mm-hmm.
I suspect there isn't epidemiology on that question, but I'm happy to find out.
Okay, that would be helpful because it would then have implications for funding source. Sorry about the brain cramp.
No. Senator Perslick.
So I don't know, maybe somebody other than Mr. Englander knows, but my understanding, the radon test is you set out this little box, you wait a time, then you take it and you send it to a lab. Do we know what the cost is to get the kit and to get the test back from the lab? Does anybody know?
So it depends how many of the sensors you're putting out. So it's not the tests themselves are not that expensive. Let me see if I actually have a per unit number.
Well, you said it could cost $100 to $3,500 per school. That's a huge range.
Yeah. So the numbers I have from our folks at testing is estimated to cost between $245 and $5,500 per school, plus travel time and mileage.
Is that because you need a monitor or a little collector in each room?
Yes.
So a real big school needs, maybe hundreds of collectors.
Right. And that tracked with our experience with lead testing. There were schools who tested 10 taps, and it cost, whatever that was, about $200. And then there was the largest school, which I think it cost $10,000 to test all of the taps. I think that was our highest school, was 10,500.
So I'm trying to get to a point where we can pass what I think is a good amendment with some adjustments, which I think one of the questions for you, Mr. Englander, is what would the staff capacity increase look like to get this work done over a 2-year period?
I'm happy to go back to the program and ask them. So you're talking about 175 schools a year.
Yep.
And it would be, do you imagine this to be similar to the lead program, wherein there would be appropriated funds for both the staff time and IT system and the testing itself, and then remediation costs? How are you thinking about it?
I think the way that Senator Pearson put the amendment forward, and to stay within that guidelines at this point, it's testing. It's making certain that parents, children, staff, children, everybody knows that building that they are going into in terms of radon.
Okay, so you're talking, just so we're clear, we're talking about the staff to do it, the actual test cost of testing, which we don't do with the Department of Health Public Health Lab. I don't believe.
Right. But I suspect you're writing the check to whomever is doing it. So that's what would be helpful to get.
And then also an IT system.
Yeah.
So I can get a rough number on that.
That'd be great. Senator Perslick.
Sorry if I already missed this, but Mr. Englander, Senator Pearson had put in here that you wouldn't have to test the school that's been tested in the past 10 years. And he admitted he just came up with that number from some mysterious place. So it would be good if the Department of Health had an idea or a recommendation
Or
of
3%.
if that's the right number or there's a different year number.
Mr. Englander, did you weigh in with Approps when they were creating the $5 million appropriation to the Environmental Contingency Fund?
No, that's DEC.
Okay,
That was money that they had available to do this work.
okay. Committee, does anybody know how many tests that would cover? I mean, and I don't think it's being required. It's basically dollars there that are optional, but I'll get a better sense of that. You know, Mr. Englander, one of the things that the committee's cognizant of, as I know you are as well, the feds may be sending infrastructure dollars. And for our schools, not, you know, number one, first and foremost, to make sure that our school buildings are healthy and that people have the information that they need to make decisions around where they work, where they learn, et cetera, but also to be ready if these dollars come in. And to be prepared as much as possible, these dollars come in. Okay, so we'll look to you, Senator Hooker, please.
Yep. If I could just have a clarification, Mr. Englander, you talked about 350 schools left. You said you do about 10 to 15 of these tests a year. How many schools have been tested?
101.
101. Okay, thank you.
Do you have a sense of how many have taken remediation steps?
I don't, and I'm not sure that it's something that we would necessarily track because we do the testing that's voluntary.
Senator Lyons.
Two questions. One is about the geography of what we know about radon across the state. So, and I don't, that perhaps there's information we could have about prioritizing schools to be tested based on radon, known radon, I'll call them deposits because it's really what it is. So that, and then the other question I have, and I'm not sure this is a Department of Health question as much as it is more of a judicial question. Once radon is identified in a school, and the school is found to be affected, are there, well, this is Department of Health, are there any requirements at the federal or state level that require immediate remediation? And then what liability is there for a school that knows about it and doesn't begin to address the situation?
That's a great question. As far as from the Department of Health's perspective, we don't have indoor air quality regulations for schools, or in fact, that matter anywhere. So to the extent that that schools ultimately be liable, that would really something that be worked out in tort. I don't know that there are federal or state regulations, but also that might be a better question for DEC or AOE. But that would really be a question about what did the school know and what was the damage.
Okay, so Mr. Englander, if you would come back to this committee with budget numbers around, as we mentioned, testing, funding, everything needed for that 2-year period to get us the answers that we need to get, and then I'll have JFO in committee, or I'll talk to them later today, hopefully, to see, I think Senator Lyons' points about, well, actually, I'm looking to Mr. Englander as it relates to epidemiology reports connecting PCBs and radon, I would say, to anything related to COVID, to see if those, I think Senator Lyons' point's a good one. And in the meantime, I'll also loop to JFO on that, because that could, as Senator Lyons mentioned, open up many more funding options.
I'm also on my to-do list, since I've written it down because it will go immediately out of my head, also checking, is 10 years the right number? And priority based on geography and geology, if that's possible.
That makes sense. So this committee doesn't, this bill is on the floor tomorrow, so I think Senator Pearson would be fine with doing an amendment third reading. If we can wrap all of this up. But what I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Englander, is to email the committee just so we have time to consider it before we meet tomorrow afternoon, so we can kind of hit the ground running, if you or your staff would be so kind as to do that as soon as you have those answers.
I will ask. I honestly don't know how fast can be produced. I will ask them to do the best they can.
Great. That's all we ask. Thank you. Any final questions for Mr. Englander? Okay, we'll look forward to possibly seeing you back in committee tomorrow afternoon. If we have any additional questions, Jeannie, would you work with Mr. Englander on that?
Sure thing.
It works. Great. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Englander.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So committee, thoughts on the amendment? I, for one, would like to see us do something. I think, Senator Lyons, if we can get that connection, then I think we're going to be in a good shape, really good shape. Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, I just looked up the budget there. There's of the 5,500,000 goes to the Department of Health, and then 4.5 is with DEC to do the air testing. But it doesn't say like how many schools. It just says to complete air quality testing in public schools. So you could do something like that to where maybe you're not maybe saying it has to be in all schools, but then you have to come up with a dollar number. Yeah, you can see why it's not as hasn't been done before. Like Senator Lyons said, there's always something that gets in the way.
So
But I agree.
I'm trying to remember what the time frame is for PCB inclusion in materials that would have been used in schools. So
Yeah, good point.
yeah, and then so it's hard though because so many schools have been repaired and all that stuff. But
isn't
there's a time frame.
Yeah, are the funds, the 5 million, are those ARPA funds? No, those are general fund dollars?
Oh, well, no, I guess they're put into the contingency fund, but I think they are ARPA funds.
So they used ARPA funds, put them in the contingency fund because of a link to COVID.
We don't know.
We don't know. Okay. But I'll loop to JFO on this and see if this is a possibility. It sounds like a way to do this, if we can, is to mimic, as Senator Perchlik pointed out, kind of mimic the $5 million kind of distribution in some ways. Senator Perchlik.
It looks like in section B, this is general fund. So it looks like
Okay.
it's a general fund, 5 million. Or general fund is the 500,000 to Department of Health for their part of the testing. And then later, it just says the funds transferred into the environmental contingency fund shall use up to 4.5 million. So I don't know. I'd have to find out where those funds, that 4.5 was transferred from.
I'll ask Stephanie.
Yeah.
Get back to everybody.
You're muted, Senator Lyons.
I thought I was unmuted. I said such wonderful things. No, I was gonna say maybe we should touch base with the DEC to figure out what their plan, if there is one, for the Environmental Contingency Fund. What runs through the back of my head is that we certainly don't want it to be testing for boats on Lake Champlain. We want it to be for schools. Oh, there's Mr. Englander.
Mr. England,
I'm lurking. I hope that's okay.
absolutely.
The DEC should have their plan out by either the end of this week or the end of next week, and they're going to make that public.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to loop to Stephanie, loop to JFO. We'll get those epidemiology reports from Mr. Englander. And I guess my only question to committee is, does this feel okay to do over third reading, or would committee members feel better just to pass over it one day as we kind of figure this out and do it second reading? And I'm looking mostly to the bill spot. I mean, I'm just wondering the general feel doing this kind of thing over third reading. If no one has any issue with it, I'm fine. But yes, Senator Lyons.
I think if it's a committee proposal, then it's simply that you mention that at second reading that the committee is working on a proposal amendment for third reading. If it's going to be a proposal amendment from Senator Pearson or another, separate individual senator, it probably should be second reading. Even though but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think Senator Pearson just would like it done. So I think he's completely flexible on this, and we could have a committee amendment with him. Yeah, I think we can figure that out. In fact, I'd like for Chair of Health and Welfare, we have the majority of the Health and Welfare Committee also behind us on this. This would be strong. No, now that's not going to happen. Okay. So final comment from me, I think, is to look at Mr. Nichols' testimony overnight. We're going to return to a clean copy of H106 tomorrow. I think Mr. Nichols is our last witness. We'll vote on 106, bring it to the floor early next week, which has become a pretty comprehensive community schools bill that also includes a number of things related to school student nutrition. So I feel good about that. And then Senator Chittenden, if you wouldn't mind keeping your eye on 115, as I've heard there are a lot of changes. And we'll pick that up once it is sent over to us. Committee, anything else? We have a chairs meeting at 4:30. Okay. Thanks a lot. I feel like we got through a lot. Appreciate everybody's efforts, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.